you so much for meeting with me today. I'm really excited to get to talk to you about Mary's Place and your experience with the organization. If you want to just get ready and get started, if you can just introduce yourself, what your role or your relationship to Mary's Place is, and how you first got involved with the organization.
All righty. Well, a lot of my story would actually be in this book that was published by Women at Mary's Place that I was involved in as I led a writing group. But how I
Mhm.
first became involved, my husband, my late husband, and I moved here to Seattle in 2007. And we bought a one-bedroom condo in Belltown. And, I was in culture shock and sticker shock because we had moved here from the Midwest. And so, people were sleeping in the awnings of our condo building. And every time I'd walk to the market, I would see people in need. And, it was really hard for me. And, I found myself, and I'm ashamed to say this, but I found myself avoiding eye contact with people. And I had worked in counseling and human service centers. So it's not like I didn't know a lot of what was going on, but it was still hard because these people were my neighbors,
Mhm.
And so I went to a Belltown community meeting, and Marty, the director of Mary's Place, was there with some other staff and volunteers and women who were experiencing the services from Mary's Place. And you may have heard this before, but Marty's really good about saying, "Come sit beside us." And I thought, how can I do that? How can I do that? And so I had recently trained as a Amherst Writers and Artists facilitator, and I thought, well, I wonder with my counseling background and in writing if I could lead writing groups at Mary's Place. So I asked Mary, and she had Marty, I mean, and she had an enthusiastic yes, go for it. So I started leading weekly writing groups, and I had no idea I would do it for 7 years, once a week. And I'd still be doing it had my husband and I not moved to be closer to family when he
Mhm.
was in the final part of his life. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I came about.
Yeah, that's a great story. Do you have a favorite memory of Mary's Place? Is there like a moment or an interaction that stands out to you? You can have multiple if you want.
Well, I don't know how long you have, but I have lots of, I think every week that I wrote with the women, it was memorable and meaningful. I
Mhm.
learned so much, and I began to embrace my neighbors, right? But what was profound, what we did in that week room every week was, women would write to prompts that I had given them, and then they could choose to read it or not. And the only thing that we could say is what we liked, what was strong, and what stays with us, what's memorable.
Mhm.
And the women wrote beautiful things, they wrote difficult things, they wrote funny things. Um, but what was so beautiful is that they felt heard. Um,
Mhm.
no one could disagree with what they said because we could only respond with what was strong, what we liked, and what was memorable. And so every week, women felt heard, and I'd hear comments like, "This is better than therapy," etc. But I think what really, you know, was memorable is after so many years, the women started saying, "We should write a book. We should write a book." And there was another volunteer helping at the time. And so we put together this book, a collection of the women's writings.
Mhm.
And it was so life-giving to so many. And we, had a social media presence. We were invited to speak at the libraries and various bookstores around town. And so the women would read from the book and
Mhm.
see the joy on their faces, to be listened to in the public, and not only listened to, but people applauded them. And all
Mhm.
the funds from the book went to benefit Mary's Place, and they continue to go to Mary's Place. But I could read you lots of things that show favorite
Mhm.
memories of what they shared. Yeah, it's pretty profound. And just every time I volunteered at the day shelter. First, it was on Bell Street, and then it moved to Stewart. And not every woman there wrote, because people could choose their experiences. And but the energy and the love in that room was always memorable. The women
Mm-hmm.
caring for each other, and yeah.
Yeah. How did you see Mary's Place impacting the greater community in Seattle?
Well, I think, Mary's Place has evolved, and they had a lot of history before I ever volunteered with them,
Mm-hmm.
1 years, I believe. But I think as the economy had rougher times and more people were experiencing, being homeless, Marty and the staff there started, they had needs and they wanted to respond to them. And so they were not afraid to tell that story. And so I think they identified to the community what they could do and not do that's helpful or not helpful. And so I think that was a community impact. Obviously, there's the obvious impacts every day, people whose
Mm-hmm.
basic needs were met. Um, but in addition, I think there was a valuable interface with the community. And so more businesses and funders, and people got involved for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But, really the impact was, one person at a time, one home at a time, or medical needs or whatever. That's the biggest impact, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked about this a little just now, but over your years working with Mary's Place, how have you seen the organization change and grow? Yeah, it's a big question. Yeah.
Well, they started off, I believe it was through a church-based, a non-denominational church. I think it
Mm-hmm.
was the Church of Mary Magdalene, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And then I think it was while I was volunteering in 2012, they got their 501c, 3 nonprofit status. And I think that really opened the possibilities for them to dream big. As a matter of fact, I think they had a campaign called Dream Big, much like the, No Child Sleeps Outside campaign that's going on currently, because they realized there was people north and south and east and beyond the corridors, but also, women who are having babies and special needs children or terminally ill people. And so, they didn't have a one size fits all shoe, right? They started responding to the needs of what they were observing coming in their doors every day.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's what I think I really admired a lot about Mary's Place is they were nimble. They got bigger. They definitely got bigger because it was small when I got involved, but growing already.
Mm-hmm.
But they got bigger and bigger and met more people's needs and offered a variety of services that, were hard to do before.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of one event, or if you can't think of one, maybe a time period that you think is particularly important to the history of the organization?
Well, I think I just alluded to that. I think it was really
Mm-hmm.
when they had nonprofit status.
Mm-hmm.
Mary's Place has always had the goal to be inclusive in so many ways. And so by having it just church affiliated, I think it limited some people to support it and also some people to use the services.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they became less affiliated, even though they had very giving values still, I think the doors for who supported it, but also who was seeking support, were flung open wide. So I think that's really was an important turning point for Mary's Place. And, it just allowed them to do some of the things they're doing today and some of the things they imagine for the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you ever have any like personal, I guess, experiences where you really witnessed that change or you like felt that happening before you?
Oh gosh. Um, yeah, that's hard for me to address off of the top of my head, but I yeah, I can't think of that right now.
Mhm.
If I do, come
That's
back
okay.
to it.
Yeah, that's all right. Those were all of my formal questions, but if you have anything else you want to add, stories, memories, insights into Mary's Place, your experience and your memories there, I would love to talk about them with you too.
Okay. Well, the things that I would tend to want to share with you is a little bit of what the women said in their own words from the book
Yeah.
that,
Hmm.
shares their experiences, but also shares their appreciation for Mary's Place for sure.
Hmm.
That would be one thing. The other thing that's pretty amazing is that even though I have moved and I'm away from there, during the pandemic, some people from New York had read the book.
Oh,
And
wow.
they weren't just people from New York, actually. They were librettists developing an opera called Joan of the City. And they wanted to pay the woman to use their lyrics from this book. And so we were able to find some of the women, but not all. And so I led online writing workshops during the pandemic to help generate lyrics for this opera, which will premiere in 2024 and 25. It'll be playing around the country. And it's a opera that is shedding light on what people
Mhm.
experience. So who knew?
Yeah, wow, that's amazing.
It's very
Wow.
amazing. It's very
Hmm.
amazing. So that's one. But here I'll share just some of the
Yeah.
quotes that from the book that some of the women wrote, and I
Hmm.
won't read the whole thing, but just some of the lines that popped. But
Hmm.
um, there was a woman named Renegade Amazon, and she wrote a eulogy for the fallen women in black. And one of the lines that just sticks with me is, "We are not invisible. We have names. We are your sisters, mothers, daughters, and grandmothers." Pretty amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
And another woman named Janet Baxter, she was unable to get to the shelter for a shower that day in time for the shower. And so she had some rude comments about how she smelled, given to her by merchants that day. And so she wrote a thing about that, a prose piece, but the line that stuck out was, "For one on the street, you wonder at the off-sidedness and try not to take it personal." And so, to me, it just,
Mhm.
the things women wrote opened my heart to grow in compassion for what they were
Mhm.
experiencing. Um, and she just used her initial in the book. And, a lot of women use pen names to protect
Mhm.
themselves. But she wrote a piece when the prompt was to write about home. And a line from that, she said, "My life has not always been so topsy-turvy. Before my pappy got locked up, I actually had a home in Long Island, New York, where the grass was always shiny, birds chirping, and sun always shining. Now I'm 22 years old, looking for a place to call home."
Mm.
So
Wow.
just in one
Mhm.
sentence there, you see the loss. But there was the appreciation and the loveliness too. Like Jennifer Hamilton wrote a poem of appreciation. She wrote, "For so long I did not have a voice. Trampled and broken, I was silenced, like so many of us. It may seem a small thing, but you heard. I feel so grateful. From my depths, I thank you." I mean, these are women's own words experiencing the Mary's Place. And I love this one about writing. A woman named Myrna wrote, "As I write, I create myself over and over again." And I love that because I love to think about Mary's Place as being a place where people are creating new lives after a former one didn't go as they had planned, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I really love that. And of course, I could go on and on with their with their words, but those are ones that kind of speak to a wide variety of the kinds of things that I experienced from the women's themselves that touched my heart. And I know Mary's Place has expanded to involve children and families now, and even dogs, I guess, at some of the shelters, which I think is so compassionate and so wonderful. But my experiences were only at the Women's Day shelter.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you for sharing those. Those are really wonderful quotes.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you for sitting down with me and talking about your experiences today. I've really enjoyed hearing your memories and hearing everything you have to share. So thank you so much.